Yoga innovator Lisa Knowlton, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you, David. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I should let people know that you are a longtime family friend, and you have a uh, friendship, I guess, that began with my son Jonathan when you were
Yeah.
both in high school.
Yes, we were 16.
Yeah, that's great. And you've been a friend of the family all those years. I mean, you've been to our house many times, and you've gotten to know us all. And so when you reached out to me, I thought, well, yeah, I really should interview you. You're a member of the family, and people will be interested to hear from somebody who knows us. And so there is a subtitle that you sent me for today's presentation that I didn't include online because it was a little too long to be part of the title. But I just want people to know that, to hear, to kind of have a sense of where we're going to go. And the subtitle that you suggested was How I Grew from Self-Hating to a True Self-Loving Individual and Its Continual Cycle of Evolution Through Life. So that's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we should start off by talking about your yoga and how you came to be involved in yoga.
I discovered yoga from a book that my mom gave me. I was working a 2 days on, 2 days off job at the time, and also at an age where I thought I understood the divorce that my parents had gone through, but my behaviors were starting to show that I was probably ignoring what I really needed to be looking at.
What kind of behaviors are you talking about?
Partying a lot,
Uh-huh.
going out by myself to San Francisco and staying out all night, doing drugs, things like
Okay.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was impacting you in a deeper way than you realized, and you were, quotes, acting out.
Yeah. I was young. I was 19, early 20s, and those types of behaviors can come with that time frame in a person's life. But as I came to understand what was really going on, I had a moment where the sun was coming up one day that I was supposed to be going to work, and as the sun was coming up, it was like I felt something deep inside of me that said, "This isn't who you are."
Huh.
And
Yeah.
I knew it was me telling myself that because I knew that I was not an addict. I knew that I wasn't meant to be mean, because not only was I, probably being mean to myself in some cases, but because of the lifestyle I was living, I was being mean to other people. And I recognized that. And I
Yeah.
knew that that's not how I wanted to live.
Yeah. And maybe being mean to your mother, was that part of it?
Um, you know, I probably did at some point. Yeah. It's not the moment that occurred to me. I actually lied to get out of being at work, and I got caught. Um,
Uh-huh.
and that the day that the sun rose, I actually sort of felt like it was the end of what I was doing. And I found out later that day that my boss had found out that I had lied about why I wasn't at work the day before.
Uh-huh. And you talk about developing more awareness of yourself and your truth. Is that a reference to that moment of the sun coming up
Yeah.
and this kind of strong sense that, wait a second, this is not who I am?
Yeah, I feel really lucky that I had a moment like that. I've thought about it many times and wondered why I felt that and heard myself speak to myself in a way that was very confident, and knowing that it wasn't the life that I was meant to live. And so as I started practicing yoga, I was living in California at the time, and I ended up driving to Montana and staying here for about a month with a friend. And while she was at work, I would do yoga from this book. And that was another really poignant moment for me, because I remember laying on the floor after my practice was done, and that's all that was happening. I was just laying on the floor looking at the ceiling. I didn't have a bunch of stuff in the periphery, like kind of in my past or out in front of me, that was, I would just call it like irritating my presence in that particular moment. Nothing bothered me. And so I knew that practicing yoga there was something to it that was going to lead me somewhere.
Yeah.
I'd be doing it for 27 years, but
Um, you say you have been doing it for 27 years now.
yeah.
That's now. And you also indicated that at some point it eventually became a problem. How so?
Yeah. So, in my 20s, I was doing a style of yoga that some people will know is Bikram yoga. And it's a very strict and rigid style that's done in a room that's 105 degrees. And
Yeah.
for me at the time, it gave me a lot of energy. And it's a very physically oriented practice. But I also, I feel really connected to yoga in such a deep way that the essence of the practice was coming through, even though I was practicing in the ways that a lot of people might deem as a very westernized version of yoga.
Yeah.
But just the simple fact that I was doing it as diligently as I was, I started to transform. But I had a really great teacher. Her name's Janice Gates, who recently passed in October last year. But she taught me that yoga and people have cycles in their life, and to be very mindful of how your cycles of your age and the seasons are going to also change as you're practicing yoga. So
Uh-huh.
as I started to lean a little more into my 30s, the Bikram yoga was no longer a style that suited me. It was actually depleting me instead of giving me energy. And around that time, I was also learning more of what's now called yoga therapy. Janice was on the board of the International Association of Yoga Therapists. So, as my mentor for well over 10 years or longer, she taught me a lot about basically that yoga therapy is more of an individualized style. So we're teaching and helping the person as an individual versus teaching large classes with 20 or more people in them.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it the word therapy evokes a lot of associations for me as a therapist and psychologist. So are
Mhm.
we talking about therapy in that way as well, or
That's a really good question, and it has been a controversy, I suppose. But as a yoga therapist, we're trained to look at the person as a whole. So we're not just looking at their physical form, but their emotional body, their mental body, and their spiritual bodies. And I want to kind of circle back to that because of how I view the human being as an energy body as well. But we were trained to recognize that if this person needed something outside of our scope of practice, that we would refer them to someone if they needed a therapist or a chiropractor or a physical therapist.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that sounds like a strong ethical position.
mhm.
Um, and what about trust? You sent me that word, and I'm not sure how that plays in here.
Well, I think the way that I've described the progression of our conversation, it included a lot of trust in myself. Um,
Uh-huh.
I, I didn't particularly see myself as someone who was very trusting of life, of the world around me, of a lot of people in my life, or even of myself mainly. But there's also corners that I turned in my life where I was trusting. So that moment that I saw the sun come up, I trusted that voice that said, "This isn't who you are." Um, I also trusted when my natural progression in yoga was meant to change. I followed that. So when you asked how did yoga become a problem, it came down to being in a relationship that was no longer healthy for me and probably the other person as well. And my yoga practice was still very oriented towards the physical, which was fine. I really don't have any regrets around that at all, but there was this poignant time, I think, in our world and my life. And I made the choice to leave this relationship. And during about a year and a half after I left that person, I went through a whole other level of transformation that not the typical go to yoga once a week for stress relief person is going to experience. I really do believe that having practiced yoga, but also making the choice that I did to leave this person had a lot to do with basically learning how to trust that in my life, I was meant to change some familial patterns that were oriented around abuse. So, yes, I had some self-abusive behaviors, but I was also, sort of in environments where I had been in a physically abusive relationship, but the work that I do today is very much sort of picking apart the human system, including our energy, body, and how verbal abuse affects a person's mind and how it can also affect their body. So how yoga ties all of those parts of the human together really helped me have a better understanding. But today I continue to study it. And I mentioned in my email to you as well that my choice to break this familial pattern introduced my ancestors as spirit guides into my life as well. So that was an interesting part of also learning how to trust that what I was experiencing was of the highest regard and not something that was actually going to take me down a whole other path of mental illness, basically.
Yeah. Did somebody give you training or workshop or something in terms of the spirit guides, or was that something that happened spontaneously?
I would say a little bit of both, but more spontaneously, which I think is a really good word that you used, because something that they've been teaching me is about the minor differences in a person's brain. There was a day that I heard the words dysfunction of insight. And so I started researching it online and started finding some research on, and when I say research, I just want to remind you and other people that I did get a degree in exercise science. So I understand the value of peer-reviewed articles and things like that. So when I was looking up for research, I was finding articles that were peer-reviewed about insight and how they've done studies on the brain that shows the right side of our brain is the side that lights up when a person has a spontaneous moment of insight, and how in our society is so left brain dominant in a plethora of ways. I could give so many examples that, when we lean into these almost like whispers of information that might lead our life down a different path, we usually ignore that because we've, built our life a certain way, and how dare we change that?
Yeah, I like the word whispers.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of whispers that can be ignored, but with time, maybe you learn to listen to them and take them more seriously.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of times they might sound kind of crazy to other people.
Yeah.
So that just kind of, excuse me, brings me back again to myself and how I lived a lot of my life according to what I thought other people wanted me to do, or according to what I thought society wanted me to do. And now that I'm here today, I just turned 50, and maybe this just comes with that age. I don't know. I've heard lots of stories about when you turn 50, but I feel like um, who I am and who I was always meant to be is more of who I am today than ever before,
Yeah.
but partly because of the process that I went through. I'm not sure that I would have found the the stunning revelation of who I am if I had stayed in the relationship that I was in, because what I'd like to get to is this word morphing, that I mentioned in the email as well, and how it is a word that my guides used with me because of my physical system was so tight, from being an athlete, from doing yoga the way that I was doing it, that my mental structure was also very tight. And so if I could compare people to like cells in biology, like a cell, two cells, that were meant to be very permeable, I think. So if I had a cell membrane that was kind of out here, that it's permeable, but that body of mine had been so constricted because of the life that I had been living, that when you said the word spontaneous, it also made me realize too that when I was living alone and having to restore myself from what I had been through, I felt like that tension was so clogged up inside my physical body that my
Mhm.
yoga practice went from being very structured, very oriented towards the traditional styles of alignment, to basically laying on the floor and crying in a ball and just sort of letting all that tension unravel, so that I can be a much more soft and sensitive person, so that I can actually make adjustments in my life according to my sensitivity to energies versus according to the strict rules of how things are meant to look, or are supposed to look.
Yeah, I want to go back to the trauma. You've been pretty careful uh, about your description, and I hope you won't mind my putting it on the table. That
Please do.
the relationship that you're talking about was, you were married. You got married, and
I was, yeah.
yeah, you got married, and that turned out to be problematic because of ways that really didn't fit into this lifestyle that was emerging within you,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and so the relationship became impossible. Now you're a child of divorce, and
Hmm.
so I would think that then getting divorced would be maybe traumatic. I mean, people often have the impression that divorce is easy. Oh, if it doesn't work out, you just get it dissolved. But it's usually not that easy if people are really open to their emotions and what they're going through. And they being curled up in a ball and crying really makes sense to me.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think what is important to me in terms of the message that I want to sort of open people up to the possibilities of is, I didn't I had a physically abusive relationship prior to the person that I married. And it was the only physically abusive one, but I had been in other relationships, not too many, but a couple where there was a lot of yelling and just um, emotional distance, all the things that a person could think of that would cause a relationship to fall apart, in my opinion. So by the time I got into my relationship with my husband, that was one of the longest lasting relationships that I had ever been in. But I had learned after being in a physically abusive relationship that there was physical abuse in my mom's family and verbal abuse in my father's family. So those two things were a part of me, even though I may not have seen it very, like too much in my own personal history, because it wasn't necessarily something that I would have called out within my own family unit when I was, raised by my parents. But it was a part of my cellular makeup,
Yeah.
and a part of the energy body. So I was, let's just say, maybe even attracting the what was familiar. Um, but as I continued down the path of practicing yoga, it was like each time that I practiced, I didn't just practice almost every day. I was taking intense, teacher trainings that were long lasting and going very in depth to the full practice of the meanings of yoga. So I was sort of
So-
opening,
yeah.
shedding some of
Yeah.
these layers. But I was also still repeating patterns in my family. So for me, my practice of yoga did a lot for me, but it didn't particularly show me that I was still kind of like, how did I get in this type of relationship again? Like, I feel like I'm really working on myself here.
Yeah. Right.
I'd had, a lot of therapy and other types of work that I was doing. But so the importance of recognizing the pattern of abuse in my family and sort of like peeking up over the edge, kind of like the sunrise that I mentioned, where I was like, I feel like there's something else out there, and how can I find it? And I think the fact that my spirit or my soul or my mind had that insight, that spontaneous moment of insight to question and then also start seeking, um, caused me to meet the right people. And I did end up working with somebody for about a month on what I would call sort of a little bit more, I'm a very intuitive person, an intuitive teacher. So I was really curious about what it meant to be more psychic and use my skills in a broader sense. So I did work with somebody for about a month, and that, again, it wasn't so much her, it was the fact that some deep part of me knew that there was more for me to be doing in my life and in the world, because my ability to morph out of having been abused and also repeating those types of patterns and also living abusively in my mind. So on the outside, I looked like a very healthy person to everybody. People were like, oh, that Lisa, she does yoga and she eats so well. Nothing's ever wrong with her. But inside, there was a lot of turmoil. So morphing is like freeing pressure. So kind of going back to the cellular structures, when, let's say, a cell over here has a virus, and it moves over towards this cell and it penetrates it to create a virus in the other cell. Well, there's also healthy cells that can actually change a cell that has a virus into it will either kill it or, slough it off, or however that works. So with people, if we can be aware that we have these soft, subtle bodies that are outside of us, we can actually recognize when someone is pressuring us to speak, do, think in a way that doesn't match who we really are. So I started to come out from under all this pressure that I had been under
Yeah.
from other people. from the lifestyle I was living, using yoga as a way to kind of keep me tied up. And then spent about 3 years just letting all of that unravel, to where now when I work with my yoga students at Montana State, I'm teaching these young people how to not just stretch and use yoga as a way for stress relief, but to recognize signals in the body that might be
Yeah.
telling something, don't go to this party tonight,
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
have discernment
Uh,
person you want to be with.
yeah. So, I'm wondering if the traditional therapy that you had, it sounds like you had some, if that
Yes.
supported this development or helped it to happen, or created a hostile environment for it. What was your experience of that?
I just appreciate your ability to listen and come up with such great questions,
Oh,
because
thank you.
that is a big part of how my story might be different than others. What I use as an example is, I struggled a lot, and there were people in my life that cared about me and wanted me to feel good and do well. So there were times when I would hear, you really have to learn to love yourself. And so try go looking in the mirror and tell yourself that you love yourself. And so I would humbly go try this, and I would look at myself in the mirror and I would say the words, I love you. And I didn't believe it,
Yeah.
so it didn't work for me. So cognitive therapy was effective in some ways, but it wasn't changing my energy body, because
Cognitive therapy. So in other words, learning to recognize your thoughts and the negative things that you'd been saying to yourself.
right, because for me to change my thoughts, it was like I was just writing it on a piece of paper, erasing it, and changing the words. So it
Mm-hmm.
was very surface oriented, or just up in my mind.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't believe it in my heart.
Uh-huh.
I didn't believe it in my body. And
Yeah.
so my energy body was portraying something different than what I was trying to get my mind to do. So this whole idea of like falling apart and allowing myself to crumble was very much like what I thought of as a sand castle, like a very
Yeah.
beautiful, pristine sand castle that was built up in my mind. But as soon as it was like my insight about my marriage came up kind of like a wave on the bottom of that sandcastle, and it just started to pull the bottom out of it, and the whole
Uh,
thing started to dissolve. My ideas of what
yeah. Yeah.
my life was supposed to look like. And I think that was probably the most painful thing, which is so interesting to me, that what I had built up in my mind was so closely related to how I felt, that as soon as the idea of what I wanted um, fell apart, my body was just, I was in so much agony
Yeah.
over it. So the mind body connection through my yoga practice, and really getting a deeper sense of what it means for our thoughts to play a part in what's happening down in here, and also our, like that cell membrane that I feel is around us, just had a big impact on being able to feel love for myself. And then what I call morphing the mind, and again, my guides really helped me with that, is being able to project that feeling up into my mind space. And that for me, not only does it create a sense of less pressure in my mind, but it feels like a type of meditation that isn't me in my head trying to keep my thoughts from racing around. It's
Uh-huh.
It's sort of like vapor. I like to describe it as vapor, where it helps lift up anything that's sort of keeping me down in my in
Yeah.
my system.
Well, I like these metaphors that come up for you. You know, they're very descriptive, and they really give us, I think, a real sense of your process, and particularly the sandcastle and the way that it began to dissolve during during the divorce, and the way that the insights and possibilities that were coming to you, different possibilities for your life, were were dissolving, were kind of the dissolving agent,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I love your use of morphing. I was trying to think. I meant to go to the dictionary. I never did go to the dictionary to see what morphing, how it's described, but I haven't heard it used quite the way that you're using it. But it's it's I find it very evocative. I felt like, okay, well, I understand what you mean. I understand this concept, and I think morphing to me is a process of change. And like when something morphs from this state of being into a different state of being, and
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, and I believe my guides gave me the word and I did the same thing. I was like, okay, what's this morphing? And so that's one of the things that I rely on in terms of trusting in the guidance that I'm being given, is that they provide me with information that they know I'm going to go look and try to find out and figure out what it is, because a
Yeah.
lot of the vocabulary they use are words that I don't normally use in my conversations with people. um, so when I did look up morphing, I discovered morphology, and it is a term used in biology, and it's the study of forms and how they relate to each other,
Okay.
so like the cells and also like people. But the thing that I think is what's required for a person to morph is what I call pressure. So how do you determine what's pressure and where is it coming from, and where do we feel it in our body? And that includes our headspace. So when someone says something to me verbally that feels diminishing in any way, if I actually have a drawing here because I started drawing what I was experiencing as well, because I knew I was going to have to explain it to somebody at some point.
Yeah.
So this is a basic sketch of me from behind. And I have a lot of tension in my right shoulder blade and up into the right side of my neck. So if
Uh,
somebody says something and let's just say thought it's a form, and when it's projected towards somebody, it can actually change the thought forms of our own thoughts. And to me, when somebody says something mean, it causes a cringing feeling in my headspace,
mhm.
possibly even a little bit of eyebrow. But internally, if we think of that energy body as going all the way inside of our body, it creates pressure inside of my skull as well. So when I recognize that that's happening, because it's probably going to happen for the rest of my life, where certain ideas and thoughts are going to have an impact on my thoughts, and I'm going to feel pressure or not.
Yeah.
Then I basically breathe into my heart space, and because of how I've been developing what it feels like to feel love in my heart space, then I move it up through my throat and up into my head, and I basically start moving that pressure out of my head and out of my body. So the tension that I feel in my body, I can kind of do the same way. And yeah, I use physical, stretching and stuff, but my yoga practice has become less rigid and more fluid. So if I feel tension in a certain area, I don't just stay there and wait for it to go away. I actually let my body change shape so that I become like as if that pressure in the muscle has suddenly become kind of like a spark and opens, and then it starts to travel through my hands or through my head. And
Yeah.
sometimes it'll come out like a cry or singing or laughing. And that's sort of where I'm probably not the only person that understands this, but when, let's say, trauma happens verbally and physically, and it gets locked in the body. So when we start moving and breathing and we sort of erupt the trauma, it also has to pass through the mind space to help heal the memory of the trauma as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, there's the cognitive therapy took somewhere somehow because it's got you paying attention to that.
Yes.
And what you're describing, there's a whole field of somatic therapy
Yeah.
that's really gotten much larger in recent years and has developed a lot more and a lot of different versions of it. But also, as I hear you speaking, it reminds me of dance therapy.
Mhm.
I have a half sister who's a dance therapist who I discovered late in life, and that's the kind of thing that she works with. And probably if she were here, she'd probably be able to elaborate more on that. But that
Yeah.
really makes intuitive sense to me. And also on your website, on your Facebook site, somehow uh, I was getting messages that Lisa's put something on her Facebook, and I don't always go to. I'm finding that Facebook is telling me about all kinds of people that I don't even
I
really
know.
know, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's interesting to explore those. But I do know you, and so it's been interesting to me to see what you've been doing, and you've been creating this very beautiful and poetic spaces and dance, and doing dance-like poses and good photographs. I'm using some of the material on for the show in the intro that I typically write about what we're going to be doing and so on. I drew some from one of your writings, and then for
Thank
the
you.
bio, I drew from another writing that you have on your that Facebook page, and you have a community of very supportive people around you because I see what they're posting and what they're writing, and you've got some people that are really supporting your journey that have some understanding and some caring for you,
Absolutely.
such that they support you. Do you find that's important to you to have that external support and recognition?
I do, and I struggle with it because Facebook can be a good place for that, and sometimes it's not, depending on the algorithms or whatever else is happening on that platform. But it's also been, for me, I know that there are other types of somatic work that's happening out there, but my process has been so personal.
Yeah,
I've I've done it all technically by myself, other
yeah,
than the guides that I speak of. And so coming out with it is challenging because not everybody understands what I'm
yeah,
saying.
yeah,
Not everybody's up for, I'm hearing like the turmoil that you might have to face in order to really let yourself grow. And that's
right.
what my guides say a lot. It's just, grow from it. How do we how do we grow from hardships and come out from underneath such difficult things where we feel like we've been battered, and why, and we wonder why, because I did many times. It didn't make sense to me because I felt like I was a pretty good person, but I found myself in these situations where I was being hurt.
Yeah, yeah. But that's such a universal wisdom is that growth comes through pain, and and uh, and you talk about pressure, and also in the therapy field, we talk about, well, the person has to. Uh, they're not going to go to therapy if they're everything's going great. So those pressures have a role for us in our growth, whether it's traditional therapy or the way in which you're following your own path and listening to your own voice, which I really respect and encourage you to do that, to stay on your path, because it's coming through in a way that's very clear. I get a sense. I think I've seen some of your drawings. It sounds like you're working with some people in envisioning their energy and then portraying that in a sort of flowing kind of drawing, right? Can you talk
Yeah.
about that work that you're doing?
Yeah, I might have a drawing of someone else's in here, but I'll talk about it. I actually, because of the healing that I've done through the right side of my brain, so my guides will help me be deliberate about what they call loving the right side of my brain. Love your right morphing mind is what they'll say. They'll say love your right arm, because what I've discovered is that there's this, let's say, like a quadrant of the human system. This is my right side, that has been collapsed, and we've been really disoriented by the loss of this balance that humans, I think, are meant to have, in being in harmony with ourself and with nature. And so it has helped me um, be, versus a perfectionist in my drawing, be more fluid with it. So when I sit down with somebody, I actually very purposefully shift. I open, right? I let my whole energy system open, and I start receiving little prompts like colors, and then I'll close my eyes and I'll see the person in my mind and get a prompt of like their shoulders. This I don't think I have. I give them away. So, but this is one of myself as well. And this is the right side of me. So I basically find where energy is concentrated using, I'd say, even color therapy. And I start intuitively following where the energy wants to flow. So what I'm guessing, what I know is happening for me is that I'm assisting the freedom of this traumatic impact through very subtle and very beautiful way. That's and I'm actually just kind of realizing it right in this moment. That is, rather than address trauma head on.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people think that if they're going to heal and deal with trauma, that's what's going to happen, is it's going to be this like huge turn in the clock, and everything's going to explode. But it's a very tender, nurturing process that, we can sort of unweave through the body. And when I'm sitting with somebody, I do that for them, and I get messages that relate. Oh, so I'm going down the left side of your body. What's your relationship like with your mother? So there's certain instances where the right side of the body is sort of representative more of the masculine or the patriarch, and the left side is more feminine and matriarch. So sometimes I will follow that, and a lot of times people are like, oh yeah, well, I don't really have a very good relationship with that person. So it's very inclusive of the whole body, and in terms of the way I've been describing it.
Yeah.
System.
One thing I didn't pick up on, but I was interested in exploring, was I think you mentioned that you had been an athlete.
Yeah. When I was a child, I was a competitive gymnast, and I also played volleyball from 5th grade until out of high school.
Yeah. So So your life has been very much about being in your body.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've used it. I've had very significant moments where I would be struggling and I would use exercise to help me. And I remember living in Marin County and going up this hill towards the beach. And each step was hard, but I used my body to help train my mind. And I think that's been a very consistent piece of my life, is for some reason my body changing has been the thing that has helped my mind change.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We really understand more and more that we're not talking about two different things, but that two sides of the same coin.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Is there anything that we haven't touched on here that you want to make sure that people know about you? And maybe you also would like to put out your website so that people can go there if they want to know more about you and what you're offering.
Yeah, my website is my name, so it's Lisa Knowlton, and that's LisaKnowlton.com. And my services kind of they change with the times, kind of like a yoga practice does.
Yeah.
Um, so my right now I'm in Billings and I can see people in person, but I have also done these drawings and have helped people with back pain in different states. So I can do stuff long distance. Um,
Using
I
Zoom? Are you using Zoom
I
to
am,
meet
yeah,
with
or a phone
people?
call even. The last person I did was on a phone call.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I did the drawing while I was on the phone with her and then ended up just sending it to her because I really think that there is energy in the paper and the pencils that I use and what I'm putting into it. So by giving it to you, um, I let people know that, if they look at it, at some point something might jump out to them and it might offer them more information that I didn't give them, but it was in the
Yeah.
drawing. Some of the drawings aren't as detailed as the ones that I showed you, so I've let people know that if they have a moment of insight where they want to grab a color and add to it, then they can add to it as well because the healing continues on their own that way. And that's another, I guess, another part of all of this, is what I'm hoping to do is to help people be able to understand what morphing is so that they can do it in any given moment. Whereas with practicing yoga or practicing meditation, we sort of set aside a time for that and then hope that it affects us out here. But we're such multi-dimensional and multi-layered people that as healing happens, something else is going to come up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be able to recognize being able to morph in the moment, like on the road when somebody's cutting you off or in the grocery store, then all the times that I have heard let it go or don't react, those were things that I couldn't do because I was reacting anyway. And so pretending to not react didn't really help me.
Yeah.
Uh, but being able to morph the energy in the moment has helped me literally be able to let it go instantly. And then suddenly I'm not even thinking about it, even though it happened 30 seconds ago.
You know what? I kind of had a free association to your last name, Knowlton.
Mhm.
The word know is in there, Know. Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, in fact, I tease people. I tell them my last name is Noatan.
Know a ton.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're aware of that, and so that maybe is somewhere in your heritage.
Yeah, I believe it because my guides come through. They've let me know that I have ancestry from Norfolk, England, and that there's a lot of courage and strength and bravery that comes from that side of my family,
Uh-huh.
and how and what that looks like, so courage and bravery, when I was in that abusive relationship, was not the same as the courage and bravery that I have today.
Yeah. Well, does this feel like a good place to wrap it up?
It does, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I really want to thank you for being my guest today, Lisa. It's good to know you, to get to experience you in a deeper way than when you were just a kid. It was this kind of peripheral out there doing stuff and hanging out with son Jonathan.
Yes,
And I know you two have been good, loving friends for a long time.
very much so.
Yeah, yeah. And so again, you're very much a part of our family. So Lisa Knowlton, I want to thank you for being my guest on Shrink Wrap Radio.
I am so honored. I listen to your show all the time.
That's a real compliment, and I appreciate that.